Okay, everyone. I'm pretty excited. I'm actually pretty honored to be here today because some of this has been around. I've been coming to RSA almost 20 years, and this is my 5th presentation in 20 years. So I'm honored to do that. And so I thought, like Saturday Night Live, right? You're supposed to get like the green jacket or something like that. So no luck on that one. So I'm wearing my favorite conference jacket, which still, I knew I was onto something. It was a number of years ago, pre-COVID. I got to be on stage with General Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright at a little keynote. It was at the McAfee conference. And I'm a veteran, ex-Navy, and I got to meet with him, Colin Powell, and we got to take a little selfie together. And he said, "Mr. Cross, I only have one thing to say. Nice jacket." So, okay, here I actually want this to be a meaningful presentation, right? I think we come to the conference here and pull a few things together. Is that how we're making this transformation to the cloud, and we're going to drill into this. First, a little bit of disclaimer is that I'm doing this, my observations, right? I've been in, those of you know me, I've been in multiple cloud providers. I'm not making any assertions about any cloud provider. I'm just giving my observations and best practices that I've kind of observed over the past 10 years. So I'm not making any claims about products, services of anyone. Okay, really, the goals for today, really, is it's these things. One is making it clear what are the advantages of moving to the cloud, right? What are some of the kind of the perceived challenges people say about moving to the cloud? 5 years ago, financial services, we're not moving to the cloud. Then we had COVID. Things have changed a bit. So what are some of those perceived challenges, right? And then another one, as you move to the cloud, right, there's differences in the security model, right? And so I'll give you some comparisons of like what you may be used to today on-premise, right, to how it's actually operating in the cloud. And last but not least, this is kind of the fun one, right, is kind of my observations are, what are the biggest risks and challenges or threats that you will see in the cloud environment that may be slightly different than on-premise? All right, if I go back a few years ago, I think it was my talk in 2007 at RSA, and I was talking about Windows Vista and the user access control. Anyone, the pop-up everyone loves? And there I said, I was the group program manager for that at the time, and I said, the reason we did it was to annoy users. And then someone in the audience yelled out and said, "Oh, can I quote you on that?" I said, "No, you can't quote me on that." And so then if you go Google my name in RSA, still to this day it says, Microsoft exec says, we did UAC to annoy users. But there was some truth to it, and actually I'm going to tell you there's some truth about what I'm going to say today. The reality is, it's not a question of if. You're all moving to the cloud. That's the reality, everybody. It's the truth. I know you don't like it, but we are. So let's really talk a little bit about that today. And it's not a battle. It's a transformation. And I'll give you some of the best practices I've learned and observed over the past 10 years on this, right? And really how you can adapt to this. There are changes, and people make mistakes in those changes, but you can do it successfully and gain a lot of benefits from it. So the reality is you get maximum performance, maximum reliability, and maximum security when you move to the cloud. That's the reality. And some of the things that drive that, right? One is the hardware innovation. Great. Even this week, right? People are talking about confidential computing and that hardware. Who can deploy that next week in your on-premise data center? Anyone? I don't see any hands, right? But the cloud providers can. Let's talk about the network. I think there's a number of talks and investments. Like, I think Rob Joyce had a great talk yesterday saying that there's all these organizations and businesses that have these routers and firewalls and devices, and they're owned by China. All right, who's keeping up with that hardware in their environment? Is everyone updating their hardware constantly, managing it? Well, I'll let you think about that. The security talent. We know there's a supply-demand curve. It's not going away. We're doing lots of great things. Like I'm trying to promote veterans and others. Hey, I think there was an interesting talk at one of the keynotes. Like, hey, the gamers, let's bring in more people to SOC, right? The supply-demand curve is still off, and it's going to be off for a long time. The price point, the compensation to bring people in. How many businesses and organizations can have 24/7, experts and threat intelligence and monitoring and SOC in your environment? It's hard. This is what the cloud providers do. Automated defenses. We know things that it's changing every day. The threats are changing every day. But can everyone manually kind of understand and react to these? It's got to be automated. and everything in the cloud is automated. And last but not least is, now if our email goes down for 5 minutes, it's the end of the world. Or social media, I know everyone's tweeting right now, right? It's like, it goes down for 5 minutes, at the end of the world. We need to have business continuity, and this is what the clouds are all about. Okay, advantages. So, DevSecOps, I know some people say, hey, this is just kind of a culture or things like that, is that the clouds provide and they operate on DevSecOps. It's global. It's 24/7, right? And how many companies have that? How many people have adopted that, right, and could do that? Continuous integration, especially in small businesses. The next, security automation. I go for a longtime friend and colleague, Jeffrey Snover, right? Why did they invent PowerShell? Because if you do things manually, constantly, we're humans. What do humans do? They make mistakes. Everything's automated, and this is one of the advantages in the cloud. I mentioned before the cybersecurity talent. Who can hire a threat intelligence expert that works 24/7 in their companies, specific to your industry? The incident monitoring. So we have all the automation, but there's also the humans to it. I think we're all pretty excited about AI, right? But is the humans going to go away? No. But we have to have them. We have to have them regionally. We have to have them in certain countries, restricted regions, all those type of things. And again, it's all about business continuity. Let's start drilling in. All right, there we go. So there's a lot of common questions, in this particular area, a number of topics, visibility, compliance, audits, right? The regulations. How do you respond to things? So I'm going to drill to each of these areas and give you some questions, and I think we'll kind of give you some clear advantages. Okay, the first one. Let's talk about the speed of things, right? It's the speed and the resources. So overall, as we know, we see here at this conference and every day, how things are, the attackers, the criminals, the vulnerabilities, it's happening in real time, right? And so who has the ability for your applications, for your services, for your hardware to monitor it 24/7 and update it? So there's a vulnerability. Let's say the next Log4j today. Who can deploy that tomorrow? Who has the people that can do that tomorrow? Who's the people that can analyze that tomorrow and get it all done? This is what the cloud providers do. What about if there's the next firmware that is or application that has been owned from a supply chain, right? Who knows exactly what they have in their environment today to have that all remediated tonight, right? It's all about the cloud providers, the DevSecOps model. It's continuous delivery. It's global. This is what we do. The other element is, I think that let's say there is a new threat from China, hypothetically, that I'm not sure that'll ever happen, right? But who has experts on those type of attacks specific to your company? What if you're in oil and gas? What if you're in healthcare? Are they going after healthcare? Do you have anyone that knows if they are or what they may steal? This is what the cloud providers do. And the other element, right, is automating and streamlining it. So you can get a threat intelligence feed, right? What do you do with it? Does anyone have automated correlation and analysis for threat intelligence feeds in your environment? Oh, there, I see one. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of automation. It takes expertise. But this is the benefit when you go to expertise SaaS cloud. This is the benefit of having that. It's part of the service. Saying it's not an additional SKU. It's part of the service and the wrapping that they try to do there. But these are the things you need to think about. Next, let's talk a little bit here about software and hardware. So first, let's talk about software. So, there's the common apps. Let's not talk about the major COTS, apps. Let's talk about, like, say, applications that you build. Your line of business apps. Not everyone's just building on, Windows and Windows Server and Active Directory anymore. We're doing lots of open source and libraries. How many businesses have full inventory of every package, every library that they're using in their environment. Maybe there's a few of you out there. I'd love to know how many businesses or organizations are building everything from source. Who builds OpenSSL from source every day? There's maybe one. The cloud providers build everything from open source. I could say one that my cloud provider, SaaS, we build it 200 times a day. We don't build a single thing, we build everything from source, right? So, if you're building your own applications, how are you building SBOMs? How are you looking at the vulnerabilities, right? We have this automated in the cloud, but then if you are the smaller and independent, you need things like Ox security, for supply chain, or step security. There's one of the things I'm really, really pleased with is looking at your code, because you're using open source. You need those type of things. But this is the advantage of the cloud provider, because this is what we do. Everything's an automated, continuous integration, continuous pipeline, and doing this at scale. So it's easy. If something like Log4j comes around, I'm building 200 times a day. It's easy to adapt to that. It's kind of hard, to meet that scale in an individual business perspective. The next thing is that it may not affect everybody, but let's talk about hardware. Okay, it goes back a few years. I don't know how many years was this. 5 years ago? I'm not sure. The Bloomberg article. That there was a chip on the motherboard, and people saying that was showing up. Well, the fact that I don't want to get into the whole Snowden thing and other countries and what certain government agencies may be doing, but there are some businesses that if the hardware is modified, the motherboard and the server was modified, you could be at risk, or the firmware. Who actually knows and validates the firmware that's in their hardware assets? The cloud providers do. Now, who actually has the ability to every server that you're getting in, let's say from Dell, do you look at the motherboard? Do you look at every chip? Do you look at every firmware, every solder? Who has the skills to do that? But this is something the cloud providers must do, from the manufacturing all the way to its implementation, ensuring that the root of trust is there, because the threat and risk is too high for everyone. It has to be there, and this is what we do. And so this is something also to think about. It doesn't affect everybody. If you're, John Doe's potato chip shop, maybe that one server is not at risk. But as you grow up in other things, it may be something to think about. Okay, let's talk about the talent again, right? I think especially in small businesses, that do you have the ability, right, to collect all the information, all the logs, have the automation on that, right? Let's say as a business, we're global now. Maybe not everyone's global, but we operate 24/7. So every business, do you have someone that is working around the clock? Do you have eyes on the glass around the clock? Who has people working every shift, every day, monitoring your SIEM for alerts? A couple. So if you don't, what's happening tonight or over the weekend? Wow, is 12 hours, 24 hours, 3 days, is that okay nowadays? It's getting challenging. But this is one of the advantages, because great awesome automation, but this is what the cloud providers is, the eyes on glass. It's all the automation with eyes on glass for every region, 24/7, every shift. It's not just follow the sun, but in some regions, it's like, even in the United States, you can guess restricted regions, people 24/7, for that. The other element is, I could say let's talk about SIEMs. There's a lot of great SIEMs out there, as an example. There's a lot of great endpoint protection, XDR out there. Great. Hey, they're great for, you got Windows laptops and Active Directory and Windows servers. That's all great. But what SIEMs out there, or XDR, knows the threats against the applications you build? Or these vertical applications, like manufacturing applications or supply chain applications or HR applications. What SIEM out there has coverage for all those specialty applications, and what is the threats against them specifically? This is what the cloud providers do. I think you may figure it out, but is there any major cloud provider that uses a COTS standard SIEM? Nope. They all build their own. You can guess. Azure Sentinel, Chronicle, I say iCloud, we have our own. There's a reason for that, because it's about the context of the applications in the environment. That's where the real detections come from. That's where the real insights come from, and that's an automated way. XDR, sure, it's easy. We got the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's like, oh, they're doing SSH, brute forcing, or, oh, there's a pseudo elevation. That's easy stuff. It's about the specific of your environment. The other element is, I can say over the years, what's the number one, I'm going to say, alert that happens the most in most of these environments or in your environment? Is it an attack? No, it's a mistake that someone in ops made with a configuration, with a change, a port opened, and if you have the great customized SIEMs, you catch that. It's the health. All it takes is one ACL, one permission to be changed, and the attackers take advantage of that in minutes. But that's one of the big advantages. The other element is I'm talking about threat intelligence. Who has threat intelligence people in your organization? A few do. That's great. But do you have your threat intelligence people talk to all the cloud providers? The cloud providers actually threat intelligence talk with each other, even though they're competitors. This is one of the things we also see in various communities. Like, I'm a member of the IT, ISAC, Critical SAS Special Interest Group, and we're competitors. But guess what? We meet every other week. We have real-time threat intelligence sharing. So if it happens to one, we know about it, and we share it. Because even though we're competitors in business, we have common enemies. Other things, I'm a member of the Teammate Village, working together and sharing in real time. Because we're the major cloud providers, we're the major entities, and that's what we do, because we can't scale individually. Every company cannot do this individually, and that's what we're trying to change. Let's talk about audits. I got growing up saying that pretty much now audit certification, if you don't do it, you're out of business. If you're deadline, you're out of business. And so I think there's one advantage is so that I think you have two choices these days now, looking where things are at. One is if you're an individual business, like, hey, if you're healthcare, got HIPAA, or something with economy, commerce, right? You got PCI. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you hire one of the big five consultant to do it at big cost? There's great solutions out there like Drata, right? I think it was really great. But what if you're going? What about the cloud? This is what the cloud major advantage of the cloud providers with your applications, right? Because we as cloud providers, that we can do all the audits and certifications globally, constantly. Evidence collection is automatic. Evidence collection and mapping is automatic, constantly. So you don't want to collect the evidence 50 different times for the same control that's the same in different ones across PCI, because of SOC, because of FedRAMP. This is one of the major advantages. This is one of the benefits. And so that we get having it. So I think many companies, there's some people that are only in the United States or only, let's say, Colorado. There's something that, hey, they're only in France. But most companies nowadays are global. So how do you do audits and certifications all on your own in a global way? That's difficult to do. But this is when the economies of scale that comes from that. And then there's the element of the audits is you found something wrong. Oh, boy. There's a vulnerability, there's something from the scan, there's a new things of the ability to automatically remediate that, detecting it and automatically remediate it even before the audit. So the evidence is then always up to date and in place. This is one of the other major advantages that some people should think about. Okay, next. So, all right. You've gone on-premise, you've been on-premise, now you're in the cloud. There is changes. And some things that I'll try to highlight some of the things that people maybe forget or don't realize or make mistakes on. And this is, I hope, one of the major takeaways from today. Okay, the first one. Who owns, all the defenses and the roles, in your SaaS application, environment? Who owns that? Well, it's actually a mix, and this is the important part. Now, one of the advantages of like a SaaS cloud provider, hey, all the encryption, right, all the infrastructure logging, the WAF, intrusion protection, intrusion detection, all those things, anti-DDoS, that's what the cloud provider provides. It's all bundled in. That's the major advantage. However, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see continuously in talking to many people this week, right, as a business owner, I'm referring to everybody's business owner, is you own the users, you own the identities, you own their roles, their permissions, their privileges. So it's your application, right? So the cloud provider doesn't own the inside the application, because if we owned those things inside the application, that means we're spying on you, right? That's why it's restricted. You own that. And so the other elements, which I'm going to talk a little bit more, is that you own the privileges, the permissions, the data access, and the logs of all those things. Because there's a difference between the infrastructure logs from the infrastructure, the network, the storage, that the cloud provider owns. But inside the application, what all the users do and perform and change, that's your logs. And then the management of that. So kind of a teaser question. Everyone that has a cloud application, are you pulling all the logs down on a daily basis? Are you looking at the user roles on a daily basis? Are you monitoring those on a daily basis? I hope that kind of gets you thinking a little bit for a minute. Next, building on that, right? So if you don't have all the full infrastructure log access, like for example, the SIEM, right? All the that's going to the infrastructure, that's all proprietary. You don't have access to that. So then how do you monitor it, right? That I just mentioned. So it's really, you need to be pulling down the identity and the application logs. If you're not doing that today, I'm telling you, you have a big problem on your hands. The identities are yours, the applications are yours, and I don't know of any major application, they don't push the logs to you. You have to pull them down. And you think about that is, let's say one of your users gets owned or compromised, or they get really mad and go do something bad, and they're pulling down all the HR data and then putting it on the web because they're mad at you. And then, well, how are you going to investigate that? Well, let's go look at the logs. But I see a lot of people that, I know I'm an ex-Windows guy, but it's like, who has the file access, logs from Windows servers? That's like a terabyte a day, right? Same thing happens in these applications. So do you think how long most applications have those logs? Maybe a week, maybe a month? Oh, this happened 2 months ago, right? Oh, are there any logs there? Nope. What are you going to do? You're hosed. So big thing is you got to be pulling these down, retaining these, and then you need to monitor these, right? And pulling these into your SIEM, because this is your responsibility. And I know sometimes customers need help. And I think there's a lot of good companies out there that are emerging. I think there was a good talk earlier this week from Mitiga talking about this, right? What they've done in helping. Well, if you don't want to pull the logs down yourself and retaining them and monitoring them, then you should look at companies like Mitiga and others to help you. That's just one example that I'm aware of. Because it's under your control, not the cloud provider. So thinking about that, is that before you kind of had a lot of control, like you control everything of the application. It's yours. It's on premise. It's like the Exchange server. Everything you touch is yours. But then you can't touch everything anymore. It's not all in your control. So what can you do, right? So there are a lot of things that almost all application providers have and look at. I think some of the most important ones that come up, right, is the element of the network access restrictions by locale and time, right? Is that, hey, David Cross should be accessing the HR application from China? Probably not. Well, why don't you have a restriction on that? What about Russia, right? Everyone goes to Russia, right, in your company. Well, maybe that could happen. I don't want to talk about that. But the time, does David Cross access that application at 3 o'clock in the morning? Those are all things that you control. Those are the most important ones, right? Especially if the user ever gets owned, right? Let's talk about application, and user role separation, right, in configuration. So role separation is that, okay, David Cross, if he's like, hey, he's full admin, he's got full DBA or other types of things, totally legitimate if he's on CorpNet or through your VPN or Zero Trust. But should he do that from RSA conference? Because everyone gets owned here, right? And has burner laptop. No. Well, maybe he could just have just read-only permissions when he's from a open internet network. Or what if he's in Starbucks, from an iPad? Maybe should he have full access or just read-only? Have you thought about that? Those restrictions, there's a lot of power there. The other ones is like let's go break glass, bring your or lockbox or things like that. Is that the cloud providers, right? There's a lot of control you can have with them. Is that they don't have access to your data unless you give them access. Are you using things like break glass, lockbox, controls, and things like that? Saying that, do you need them to help troubleshoot? Do you want to control when they can perform maintenance on things? That's completely under your control. I know it's also important to a lot of countries around the world, is that the keys. I'll stand behind it. I've been around for a long time. Is that the cloud providers, they do wonderful key management and vaults and things like that, and automated. But hey, you can bring your own key. You can control that. That's under your control. You want to control that? It's yours. It's your choice. Those type of things. And then last but not least, it's a broken record, and you guys hear it from me multiple times. Who does not have MFA here? Everyone's got MFA in your company? 100% MFA? Yeah, I know, everyone hates it. But I'm going to tell you right now, and I'll hit it up again and again. Over the past 10 years, of any attack or thing that I've seen done in the cloud, 99% of the time, you may argue with me it's 95% of the time, I'm going to say 99% of the time, the user was phished and they didn't have MFA. Maybe the 1% is that they weren't phished and their machine had been owned. Let's put that aside. You've got to have MFA. You have to. That's where all it's happening. Okay, another one. All right, everyone's just, I want to have a physical audit of the data center. I don't trust you guys, right? Well, some things aren't that ridiculous, but what do you do? What can you do, right? So this is what the cloud providers is they're constantly audited. They're constantly having third-party performing audits and examinations across every certification, everything from SOC, HIPAA, FedRAMP, all these. They have these audits constantly. So all you have to do is ask for it. They're very diligent. I can tell you, I've been in this business for a while. The audits, they're not a game. They're not simple. They're diligent. They're constant. They're not just every year. Sometimes some of these are quarterly. They're constantly ongoing, constantly. All you have to do is ask for that. And it's third parties. And I tell you, the cloud provider, we all do our own audits in addition to the third-party ones. The other element is that you can say they all do third-party penetration tests and ethical hacking. All you have to do is ask for it. It's there. So if you're a customer, you want to be a customer, just ask for it. You can get that. And then you look at their policies and their documentation and the reports. You can say that, wow, this is the same thing I would have done. I don't have to pay $25,000 a pop for each and every time. It's already being done. It's being constantly. And they're doing it for millions of customers. Not thousands, because millions of customers all rely upon this. That's the world. So that's one of the best practices to think about as well. Another one which I think is kind of interesting to a degree, and I think it's the best practice. I wish I had the best examples for you, but let's say everyone uses Intel chips, right? For ever past 15 years, we only use Intel chips, right? No, sometimes we use AMD, because it's cheaper, alternative. ARM, there's a lot of ARM out there now, even in the clouds, right? So where am I going with this, right? The reality is, I'd love to see, who out there is only using one cloud and only one cloud for the rest of their business? Nobody's? Everyone's going to multiple clouds. They're going to be multiple clouds, just like the chipset, right? So with that said this is where I think one of the biggest interesting risks are, how you really need to think about that. Because this is one of the things that the cloud providers can't really control themselves. Some may say a little bit, but really is that how do you have consistent policies, how you have consistent operations, how you have consistent monitoring across them. If you name your two cloud providers, you want to be consistent across both. The cloud providers are not going to say, oh yeah, we're same as them. We're monitoring to make sure that we have the same controls in place. You need to do that. Right? And this is where you need to have those central management tools and capabilities to look at to ensure that you have the enforcement and the monitoring across those multiple clouds. I think this is maybe one of the big gaps. And highly recommend that you think about this because it doesn't come naturally from the cloud providers themselves. I think someone would like to do that, but I think this is where I think that those inconsistencies can arise. Okay, this is where it gets a little fun. So I say the attacker view. So based on my experience, what do I see are the biggest mistakes or risks you see that when you're in the cloud, what comes out? All right, first one. I mentioned before, they always go after the identities. If you have a user with any permissions and they're not MFA, guess what? It's going to happen. I don't want to say that I've gotten phished. Boy, I'm attempted every day, or attacked every day with that, right? They're getting good. And we all know OpenAI, ChatGPT, they're going to come up with some really good language specific to people and spear fish like crazy. If you don't have MFA, you're going to be owned, and you're going to be sorry, and it's going to be your users. The second, and it's going to be painful. So there's other element, like talking about configuration, setting up things like that. When it's manual, I'm going back to Jeffrey Snover again, right? If it's manual, you're going to make mistakes. You got to automate these things. You got to have consistent policies and using the tools to do that. If your role separation, your role segregation, your permissioning is not monitored in automation, right? Someone's going to make a mistake someday, and guess what? The attackers will find it. That's what they do. You just assume, I can say, like in our cloud, constantly, no matter how hard you try, we see every node, every instance is constantly scanned every single day. We scan everything every single day. So do the attackers. And the moment you make a mistake, they're going to find it. So be careful in that. Look at automation in that case. I'm going to build on this point in another one here. Here's one, is that especially you think of, I would say in the SaaS environment. So you have a test and development instance. It's like there's no production data in it, right? That's fine. You want to actually do testing, getting used to how it's workflows, get doing training, but you're not worried about it. You don't have to patch it because the SaaS provider, it's all patched for you, right? It has no production data, no personal information. What are you worried about? Well, like everything, like in our regular environments, your tests, your staging, your development instances, do you monitor them like your other ones? No. Do you patch them? Well, you don't have to worry about patching, but you leave the configurations open, you don't do something, and I can tell you, they love to do crypto mining on it. All it takes is like you got a weak user, they're not using MFA, it's just a test instance you're playing around with, and then you forget about it. And then they start, they get on board, they start mining Bitcoins, and you get a huge bill. Like, what the heck? So be careful, everybody. Next one, I mentioned before. Okay, who here has a cloud application? Anyone? There's someone out there. And of those people who raised hand, are you collecting the logs every day? Well, a few of you are. Every day, building that, right? Because the moment something happens, you say, they did it 2 weeks ago. Okay, you don't have the logs. Too late. Then what did they do? How did they do it? Don't know. It'd be very painful, everybody. Next one. Here's one, it's like sometimes say, hey, so everyone's going to the cloud, right? Is that, hey, you may have some SaaS applications, you may have some PaaS, PaaS forms of service, you may have some VMs. I think one of the biggest mistakes I can say, not common, don't have a common identity, especially with higher level permissions across those. Saying, hey, Jane Doe, right, is an admin and can be root across all those environments. Big mistake. Don't have identities spanning across it. It sounds very convenient, but guess what? Even in the Linux environment, right, or an open source environment or cloud environment, you can laterally move if you have a common identity in a single cloud provider across those types of environments. Don't do it. Very rare, but when it's done, oh boy, extremely painful. That sometimes they come in, let's say, a VM, you had a test VM that you had there, and they got into there. Well, no, great. They have the full root permission. They go over to your SaaS applications. Bad idea. Next one. I know people are going to hate when I say this, but everyone, you get a SaaS application, right? Everyone wants to customize it. You want your own pages. You want your own proxies. You want your own configuration, your own workflows in front of it. You want to customize it. Sounds great. Okay, for any of you that do that, how many of you actually do all the SaaS, DaaS, analysis? How many people threat model that? How many people pen test their own customization when they put it in front of a cloud provider, SaaS application? Does anyone? And guess what? Every time the attackers, they don't scan just the cloud provider's code and assets. They're testing your code. And guess what? People make mistakes. Everyone's not a perfect developer. If you're not threat modeling it, you're not testing it constantly, you're going to get owned. It happens. It's hard to believe. And I know you want that customization, but you have to treat it as if you are a fully fledged development shop and doing all the best practices on that one. Those little things in front of an application can haunt you. The other one is that, this is one of the harder ones that I wish I had some specifics, but sometimes you want to put additional security tools or security in front of things, advanced security capabilities that have really high permissions. But remember, it's kind of like having a house and you're having a pet door. It's like, it's so important. But the moment you create another door like that, you're giving them a way in that you want to be careful about. Another one, the shared stack is a major risk. I'll give you, I won't call that one, but I think one of the things that I'm proud of our cloud is that, okay, let's say you're running a SaaS cloud application, a critical one, HR, finance, things like that. And that host also runs customer VMs, for IaaS as well. Is that okay? It's a trusted cloud provider. Well, didn't we have one this week? It's another side channel attack, like Spectre Meltdown, another side channel attack this week. So if a customer VM is running on the same host as your SaaS application and there's a side channel attack, guess what? They just got into you. Shared stack. You should never want that. You should try to avoid that at all costs because it's a major security advantage. I don't worry about it in our cloud because we don't have a shared stack. And that's why you plug anything, but it'd be good. Mentioned before, outdated user and permissions, right? If you don't have the monitoring, right, how many people, we see it time and time again, oh, John Doe, he left the company, still got permissions, and by the way, he was using a Gmail email address in there instead of the company's email address, and still has permissions. Have the automation, have the monitoring, look assistance, on that. And building upon that is the insiders are the most prominent risk for your application. I'm not talking about the cloud provider insiders. That's my job. I'm talking about your insiders, the users that don't have MFA. I can say they're either the ones we see is that they're phished, and they come in and do that. They've been owned because they were surfing the web with their laptop and it didn't have any protections, or they got mad and became malicious and they're doing bad things. 99% of the time, I could say my observation of the past 10 years, it's always been the insiders that you don't have the right protections against and monitoring for. All right, summarizing here that, hoping to see that, the fact that you can reduce many of these risks and threats, right, by moving to a cloud provider and a SaaS application, right, it's worth the new, taking on the new security model, right? That is, there's major advantages based on a lot of things that I described, and happy to talk about more, in Q&A as well. Next is that you do have some reduced visibility, and I think sometimes people are uncomfortable. It's like, well, I don't have all the network infrastructure logs, right? However, all the other benefits you get from the additional hardening, the additional protection, the additional automation that you can never match against. Can you have the world-class, threat intelligence and automation and detection and the sharing, right? With additional performance and reliability, right? I believe it offsets that enormously. And then third is the element is we're becoming global companies, right? Is so that as you're thinking as you're becoming global, right? Do you have the ability to say you've got the deployment, you're going to meet all the audit compliance and regulatory requirements from resources, from data localization or data regionalization, from each and every country, so that the data that's in France only stays in France, that the people that touch it are only French or European, and those type of things. This is another major advantage that I really didn't talk about very much that can provide in a cloud application provider. So my recommendation next step. If you've not yet moved to the cloud, right? If you still think about it, say you are moving to the cloud. Remember, right? You are, but you've not yet, right? Certainly identify, the kind of the questions you may have, for your application, and go to your cloud provider of choice, right? And say, hey, can I see your audit? Can I see your certifications? Can I see your your penetration reports. So they say, that's going to match what you have today or what you need today, so you can make the right choices. Next, if you have moved to cloud, and I think a lot of you have there, is that you make sure today or tomorrow, it's like everyone leaves tomorrow, right? Or some people leaving today. Today, you are collecting and retaining your application and identity logs. This is your #1 mission that you should be doing today and walking away from. The second is, if you're not using MFA, you know what's coming next. You're going to get, one of your users is going to get owned, or they already have been, you just don't know it yet. And third, okay, then the next 6 months, every 6 months, it should really be quarterly, but every 6 months, is that, are you reviewing all the permissions in the log, right? People should be, especially the high-level permissions, is automatically, they're taken away. I could say myself, even a cloud provider, all our high-level permissions are automatically taken away every single month. They're not automatically added back in. They have to approve again and again. We don't take those risks, right? The other thing is that, especially if you're doing your own customization, and I didn't talk about too much here, but an example is like mobile applications. So people develop their own mobile applications to SaaS clouds applications, or your own applications, to the SaaS cloud. Are you testing those? Are you doing pen testing those? I can tell you there's so many apps out there that people build themselves. They don't test them at all, and those are the attack purpose because they're trusted into the cloud. They're your identities. But if your application is faulty and has vulnerabilities, that's what the attackers are going to use. And so you need to be doing that as well. And so then continuously patching and updating those things, because you'd be surprised to say that it's not a vulnerability in the application or the cloud provider. The vulnerability is the app that you built. So I hope everybody that kind of provides kind of perspective, some best practices. And I do hope left a few minutes if there's any questions I could help answer.
One quick question. So my organization has cloud-first strategy, which means we either build in cloud-first or procure as SaaS. You mentioned logging all IAM and application logs. Is that even possible, and how expensive that would be? Because in non-cloud environment, you prioritize asset because logging is not cheap. And also, if you're logging too much, are you then creating detections out of all of those? So I want to kind of clarify, are you saying log everything or prioritize your applications, like critical applications, confidential applications, log those, and then if you're done with those, go after other applications?
Good question. I think it really kind of recap is that, hey, a lot of the logs, like logging everything and pulling everything down, it can be expensive for many reasons. So I think an element is, I think you raise a great point, is like, do you want to prioritize those? I think one of the biggest things I can say is to think about having some of them available, like some cloud application. It may be good for 1 day, 7 days, or things like that. Having like 30 days of logs that are circular versus having no logs is a very, very important point. And yeah, I think for critical applications, it makes more sense that, here's an application that has no value, even if someone mess something up, you don't care. I agree. Your critical application, your business risk, but I think as an element of having some of those available, into your SIEM in a circular way. You're not retaining them for a year because most things you'll know within 30 days, but having some of that is a great idea. Good question. Anything else? If not, I'll be happy to take. There's another one coming up. I'll be offline as well. So.
Yeah, Michael Rotimo here. Quick question: do this providers, cloud providers, SaaS or whichever, do they typically provide their penetration testing reports? As it is, it's challenging for even them to give you their SOC reports. They go through this. We need you to sign an NDA. But haven't seen much of them giving like penetration testing reports to their clients. Good question.
Is that I think it's like, hey, can you actually get the penetration reports? And so I can say in a general sense, based on my experience, that yes, you can. You just kind of have to ask for them, right, and be persistent about it. And so I think it's sometimes you say, I'm not a customer, give me your penetration test report. It's like, no, I'm sure they'll get some pushback on that one. But if you are a customer, you just need to ask and say, I want to see it, and it's because it's part of, like, think of PCI, SOC, FedRAMP, all those type of things. The pen tests are critical in that, and they have to be done, and they are available. You just have to ask them. If a cloud provider says no, then maybe you should be concerned. Yeah. Yeah, so as another individual here said that, yes, it could be part of our TPRM, the risk management view, things like that. So I can say that our customers, when they ask for it, they get it.
Okay. Because I've dealt with some cloud providers who, maybe they provide a specific service and they say, this is our security program. They just give you a booklet and they say we don't really have time to, fill out any of your questionnaires or whatever. Like you can either purchase the service or not.
Yeah, the question is, you say, hey, will they answer every questionnaires? I think, that one's probably more difficult one to take, is like I could say that, we get 100 questionnaires a day, and they're all slightly different. And I think that's more of the challenges that we're facing as an industry, is how to more standardize that. But, if there's anything that maybe you and I could talk offline, and be happy to help. All right.
We are a SaaS provider, and very quickly we give the penetration test, because what we do is we sanitize them. So we just give the executive report the findings, we remove any exploitation detail and give it to the customer. And I don't see why not everyone shouldn't be doing that. There is nothing critical in just provide the finding.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It certainly is that, I think the penetration part is that something that is found, right, and I think this would make sense for everybody, something that is found is not going to be revealed, right, especially when it's been patched, right, because that's not in the interest, but to show that it was done and has been validated, that has been corrected, and that's the most important point. So thanks, everybody.